Hello everybody, my name is Jeff Renard. I am a senior system engineer based out of Los Angeles. I cover major accounts and we're here today to talk about closing test dev opportunities on Nutanix. I've had some success with test dev opportunities in Nutanix or on Nutanix, and I'll reference one of my larger deals that we closed this last year with a customer down there and sort of some of the ways that we had some successes. To level set for a minute though, any opportunity that involves test dev has to come from solving a problem, right? Any Nutanix opportunity is going to be about solving a problem. And some of the pain points associated with test dev that Nutanix is very, very good at solving is segmentation, right? We're going to take test dev, we're going to move it to an isolated stack, maybe away from your production infrastructure. Maybe there's sloppy change management procedures, maybe governance and security are not so good. And what we found is the business oftentimes would love to find a way to have test dev isolated. So we've isolated an opportunity, we've identified some of these pain points, we have a customer that's ready to stand up an isolated stack on Nutanix to run test dev. How do we actually close this business? But what I found is many of these opportunities where we have a new audience, developers or infrastructure that needs to sell a solution to their development teams, they're going to come down to a POC. But when we're doing a POC, in my view, a Nutanix POC is about showing these teams that Nutanix infrastructure functions in the exact same way as their traditional architecture does. And the best way to do that is in our hosted POC. Test dev, we're going to have a lot of applications potentially, but oftentimes, especially if we're talking about Linux apps or maybe smaller SQL apps, a lot of these are applications that are smaller VMs potentially, and we can deploy those in the hosted POC. It's very easy to sort of reserve space here. Work with your Nutanix teams to get some space. We have a hosted POC lab here in San Jose. We also have a performance team focused on pre-sales opportunities in Raleigh, North Carolina, that you can work with to reserve a more dedicated lab, a more dedicated stack for a longer period of time. Maybe you need a week and you want to really dive in on SQL or you want to really dive in on containerization or whatever the case may be. Now, if a hosted POC doesn't suffice, or if teams need to really work on integration or workflows between production and their development environments, an on-premises POC might come next, right? So you want to start asking these questions of, what's the gear they plan on deploying, right? You don't want to have an on-premises POC be whatever happened to be in region at the time, or whatever the SE that you're talking to, maybe has available. You really want to ask those questions. What do we want to sell the customer? And that's the block that you want to do the POC on. And the other thing is, and this is of course true of any application-specific sale, you have to know the language. You have to be able to speak Nutanix, but you also have to be able to speak developer, right? So all these opportunities can sometimes go into conversations about, snapshotting or restoring SQL, or DevOps, or containerization, or why they decided to go with AWS and why they're pulling back to on-premises. And when you get into the POC, you have to be sort of prepared to have those conversations. Every one of these deals obviously is going to have competition. And the primary competition in every single Nutanix deal you're going to run into is the status quo, right? The organization you're talking to is comfortable with three-tier architecture. Every success they've had and every outage they've ever had is on three-tier architecture. That's where they've been putting all of their bets for a long time. Nutanix, perceived maybe as the new kid on the block, this crazy new hyper-converged architecture. But test dev, oftentimes you're talking to the folks who are technologically the most out in front in the entire organization. Strike up a conversation about DevOps or Docker or whatever with these guys, and they're going to know what you're talking about. Not everyone in the organization will. So they may be very ripe for a new type of technology to come into the organization. AWS, Azure, public cloud, the fact that these developers have been able to, for a number of years, go out to AWS, spin up a AWS instance, start developing, and then as that instance starts to grow, all of a sudden there's a bill, they come back and they turn it over to their infrastructure teams. Yes, there's competition, but get some details about that stuff. Understand, why did the developers want AWS? Was it the speed of deployment? From PO to deployment, we can have infrastructure on the ground for you in 3 weeks. So do you need it? Do you literally need this stuff instantaneously? Maybe go out, everybody on this who's watching me here, go out and sign up for an AWS account. Understand what that process is like so you can actually talk to these developers and understand what they see as the advantages, but also have a conversation with them about governance and security. It's all about them making their lives easy, and Nutanix can do that for them. And then surprisingly, bare metal and white box and grow your own continues to sometimes percolate up, right? You will talk to a lot of these developers who are developers, right? They grow stuff and the code, right? So they'll have this conversation with you about, oh, so you're just locally attached storage and you have, some software magic on top. I'm just going to build that myself. I've had those conversations with customers where I haven't closed business. I've had those conversations with huge companies that talk to us about Nutanix and think that they can just go build it themselves. So be prepared to get into the weeds with a customer that potentially may know nothing about storage. They may not have any reference point for virtualization. They think you're just some fancy, slick, distributed storage thing that they're going to go build in 6 months for themselves. Obviously, they can't. So you're going to have to educate them on the value of purchasing a solution. So you get a POC in there. You get the workloads brought over from production. Start kind of working with both the infrastructure teams and also the developers. And then how do you close this deal? The things that are always going to be paramount to actually bringing a Nutanix deal to close, once quotes start flying around and people start asking questions, is operational simplicity, right? Do this post POC as fast as you can. You can have a hosted POC stood up here, matter of a week, reserve some space, bring a Nutanix SE in. We can do from you have no cluster to you have VMs in a number of hours on the hosted POC. We can turn that over to the team, right? They can get in there, start provisioning VMs. They can start to see the value. I've had customers that were building out, for example, Oracle test labs on OVM, and they've been trying to work with OVM, which is not easy to work with. They'd been trying to stand up the self-service portal. We go in there, we get a hosted POC going on Acropolis, and that day the OVM project gets killed. This is the reality of how fast we can move. So get in front of these guys and really capitalize and have this conversation about operational simplicity. This stuff is easy to deploy. It's easy to manage. You don't need to engage with your storage team. You don't need to ask them permission to spin up LUNs. There are no LUNs. You guys are going to own this stack, right? API-driven everything is huge in the space. In case you guys don't know, APIs are first-class citizen on Nutanix. Our UI uses the same APIs that are RESTful APIs that you would use to connect to externally. If you're talking to teams that have stood up a self-service portal internally, they can talk to Nutanix. If they're spinning up, if they have leverage Puppet or Chef or other automation tools internally, vRealize, right? UCS Director, they can talk to Nutanix. Developers love APIs, right? This is the world they live in. This is especially important with Acropolis because without having to even get into PowerShell and getting access to vCenter, maybe in a vSphere implementation or being a PowerShell with Hyper-V, Acropolis gives these guys the opportunity to spin up VMs, burn them down, the whole shebang, all leveraging APIs. This is a very comfortable area for a lot of developers and a place where Acropolis particularly really shines. And then I'll beat this drum. You want to make sure you're sizing accurately based on workload. I found that if I have conversations with customers, regardless of the workload, if it's test dev, if it's some business critical app, whatever it is, and I'm down in the weeds on numbers of CPUs and amount of RAM and physical storage capacity, this is not a good opportunity. But if I'm talking about the underlying infrastructure to support workloads, and those workloads are tied to the business, those are deals that you win. And so sort of to leave you some food for thought, test dev has been historically a very solid use case for Nutanix and server virtualization, core server virtualization, specifically on vSphere. And the organizations there are a lot of business drivers to try to segment test dev from production. It's good business practice, but the cost of a SAN in support of virtualization has sometimes made that challenging. So Nutanix has been able to come in, stand up dedicated infrastructure that scales a lot more elegantly than traditional three-tier architecture. Great sandbox, great pre-production environment. Some of my largest customers have prod and pre-prod that they buy in pairs on Nutanix, right? This has been an area for us. But DevOps and containerization is really driving a lot of change in business. It's a buzzword potentially. Go read the Phoenix Project, Gene Kim's book, right? Go to Docker's website and familiarize yourself with what they're doing. There's a lot of very interesting things happening in this space, and not all of them are virtualization centric. So one of the things with Nutanix as a virtualization solution is being able to bridge that gap between the infrastructure teams who see enormous value in virtualization and the developers who may not understand how virtualization could benefit them as well, right? VMware is making advances in this area. You're going to see us making a lot of advances in this area around containerization. But understand these concepts. Understand why businesses are interested in iterating infrastructure the way that their developers are iterating their code. These are, I'm not going to talk about it here, but these are things you should certainly be familiar with. It's a force for change inside the business world right now, and Nutanix is on the right side of that conversation. And developers love Nutanix, and the Acropolis hypervisor changes everything. Right? Developers may have had exposure to virtualization with vSphere. They may have spent some time with Hyper-V, fantastic toolkits, right? Some different capabilities. But depending on the development audience, right? If they're developing on SQL, maybe Microsoft Hyper-V is a great option. But a lot of the developers I talk to, especially guys who are used to grow their own and live in the Linux world, they love the Acropolis hypervisor, the API focus, the access through the GUI, the visibility that they've never had in any infrastructure stack. The momentum we've already had in DevTest is only going to accelerate. You're going to see great things out here from Nutanix, and we really want to partner with all of you to take these DevTest opportunities down. So thanks very much for all of your time. Looking forward to seeing you in the field.